The air smelled faintly of roses and grilled meat, but I couldn't taste or feel a thing. Not after that. Blair was still holding the mic, her voice too sweet, too loud. "They said you'd hand it over," she repeated, as if we were having a quiet conversation, instead of standing under a white tent with 200 pairs of eyes watching. I blinked. What her smile stretched sharp and bright under the string lights. "Arden, the estate keys," she asked again, this time facing the crowd. Laughter had died. Champagne flutes hovered midair. Forks stopped clinking. Behind her, Liam, my only son, stood frozen. His tuxedo fit too well. His hands were clasped in front of him like a groomsman waiting for a cue. Not a word. Not a blink. Just that practiced stillness I hadn't seen since his debate team days. I took a slow step back. Blair moved forward. Then came the slap. Not a shove. Not a hissed insult. A full-handed, cheek-stinging, crowd-silencing slap. It echoed under the tent like a dropped wine glass. My knees wobbled, but I caught myself on the nearest chair. I didn't look at anyone. Didn't meet Liam's eyes. My face burned not from pain, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. I turned and walked. Past the buffet. Past the bar. Past the trio still tuning their instruments near the arch of flowers I'd helped fund. No one stopped me. No one followed. The vineyard air was cooler outside. Quieter. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The number I needed wasn't in my favorites. It wasn't saved at all. But I remembered it. Every digit. I dialed. Waited. She picked up on the third ring. "It's me," I said. "It's time." And Marina simply replied, "I'm already on my way." I'm Arden Maddox. 61 years old, widowed since Liam was 9. I taught high school English for 32 years, and I'm not ashamed to say I was damn good at it. I can spot a bluff, a stall, or a quiet plea in a student's voice before the words finish landing. That skill didn't stop at the classroom door. It followed me home, and I never stopped listening. The house I live in, the one Blair calls the estate, was never about grandeur. It's solid, practical. A little weathered like me. Bought it after the wrongful death settlement came through. Took 20 years of saving and saying no to things other women my age said yes to. No new cars, no vacations, no remodeling. Just slow, steady ownership. Liam grew up in that orchard behind the kitchen window. I used to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee grading essays while he chased pop flies and scraped his knees. Now, he stands behind a woman who calls me outdated and in the way. Blair once told me I needed to learn to release control. That's rich, coming from someone who moved into my guest house and immediately painted over the window trim without asking. Said beige was too passive for a growth environment. She talks like that. All buzzwords, no roots. The night before the wedding, I was coming down the stairs when I heard her on the phone, laughing. "She won't even know what hit her," she said. "We'll just say it's symbolic. It'll be cute." I stood there in the dark hallway, holding onto the banister like it might steady more than my feet. Cute. That was the word she used for taking something I built alone. I didn't say anything then. I didn't barge in or slam a door. Instead, I opened my safe and reviewed the papers I'd been quietly preparing for over a year. Because Blair wasn't the first person to try to take what I built. She just thought she'd be the last. It started as a gesture, one I thought was full of love. The carriage house had been sitting empty for years. A 2-bedroom cottage at the edge of my land, tucked behind the elm trees, where the deer pass through in the fall. Liam had always said it would be the perfect starter home. So last summer, I had it cleaned up and handed them the keys. No rent, no catch. Just a quiet offering. They stayed 2 months before Blair started referring to it as temporary. She filmed a video, walked through one morning, captioned it, "Manifesting something bigger." I didn't say anything. I just watched the video again and again, trying to see what I'd missed. A few weeks later, I came home from the grocery store to find a strange SUV in my driveway. A man in loafers was standing near the porch steps, taking notes. He said he was a realtor, just evaluating the larger parcel for potential listings. I smiled, politely, walked inside, and closed the blinds. Liam claimed it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she got excited, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like he used to do when he forgot to take out the trash. But that kind of excitement doesn't bring a realtor with a clipboard. Then came the request to use the main house for their engagement photos. Just a few shots, Blair said. We want that heritage feel. I agreed, watched from the upstairs window as she opened cabinets in the kitchen, walked the halls like she was testing them out. I waited until they left, then called a locksmith. He changed the locks that same afternoon. I didn't explain why. I didn't owe anyone that. A week later, Blair texted me, asking why her key no longer worked. I told her I'd needed to upgrade the system. She didn't reply. But 2 days after that, I noticed the side gate had been forced open. Footprints in the mud. A cigarette stub I knew didn't come from me. That's when I pulled the papers out again. The ones Dana had warned me might be necessary one day. 11 years ago, I sat across from Dana in her office, staring down at a set of documents she called my future armor. Back then, it seemed like overkill. I wasn't rich. I didn't own multiple homes, but she insisted that peace of mind didn't care about net worth. It only cared about control. We drafted a land trust. Everything House Orchard Carriage House was bundled neatly into one legal shell. I never signed it, tucked it into a safe, and told myself I'd know when the time was right. The time arrived the day Blair moved in. She didn't ask. She informed. We'll be staying in the carriage house until we figure out next steps. I nodded, but inside a switch flipped. I opened the safe that same night. 2 weeks before the wedding, I signed every page and had Dana file it quietly. I became both trustee and tenant, paying myself rent through a limited liability company we registered under a neutral name. From the outside, I looked like a retired woman renting from a trust. The estate wasn't mine anymore, not on paper. It hadn't been for 14 days. But Blair didn't know that. Neither did Liam. They thought the woman in the rocking chair was still holding the deed in her weathered hands, just waiting to be pressured into handing it over for the sake of family harmony. Blair kept talking about the generational shift, how I should be proud to pass the torch. She painted it as legacy, but she meant leverage. I kept smiling, listening, letting her believe what she wanted to believe. When she mentioned a symbolic key ceremony during the reception, I nodded as if touched. In my mind, I saw the clause Dana had insisted on, including the one that made any unauthorized claim to the land a violation of trust governance. The house they were circling like vultures wasn't theirs to take. They just hadn't realized it yet. So I made a quiet call to Marina, the trust administrator. She said she'd come in person. No fuss, just facts. Marina arrived exactly 1 hour after my call, stepping out of a charcoal-colored sedan with the same calm precision she carried into boardrooms. She wore heels sharp enough to cut through tile and a tailored pantsuit that made her look like someone who never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She didn't greet anyone, didn't scan the decorations or the guests clustered near the bar. She just walked straight toward me with a slim folder tucked under her arm. Arden, she said, offering the envelope. No handshake, no ceremony. Just business. I took it, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my palm. It wasn't heavy, just a few sheets of paper, but weight isn't always measured in ounces. The music had picked up again, something upbeat and bright, as if the earlier slap had been a collective hallucination. People laughed too loudly, as if trying to stitch the evening back together with forced cheer. I stepped into the reception tent, the envelope tucked against my ribs like a second spine. Blair spotted me first. Her expression tightened, then smoothed as if she were adjusting her face for the camera. Liam turned when she touched his arm, his brows lifting when he saw the envelope. "Here," I said, offering it to her. She took it with the confidence of someone expecting good news. Maybe an apology. Maybe a surrender. Instead, she pulled out the first page and froze. The line at the top read, "Property title held in trust. Governance by Board of Trustees. Administrator M. Helms." Her eyes darted to the second page, then the third. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere did her name appear. Not as beneficiary, not as future heir, not even as a footnote. Liam leaned in, squinting. "What is this?" Before I could speak, Marina stepped beside her, hands calmly clasped. "You'll need to vacate the guest house by the 3rd, she said. "Per trust regulations." Blair's lips parted, but no sound came out. She wasn't shocked, it was something sharper, something that sliced through her practiced poise. I didn't stand there waiting for her reaction. I just turned toward the exit because Marina and I still had one more matter to finalize. The music kept playing like nothing had happened. Something light and jazzy drifted across the tent, but no one really danced. The rhythm didn't match the mood anymore. It just sat in the air like background noise that no one could turn off. I sat at a table near the back, alone, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The cloth napkin beside my plate was still perfectly creased. I hadn't touched my glass since I walked back in. Around me, whispers moved like wind too soft to catch, but sharp enough to sting. No one came over. No one asked how I was. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they didn't care. Clara appeared just long enough to slide a folded napkin across the table. In her steady handwriting, one word, proud. She didn't linger. She just gave my hand a squeeze and disappeared into the crowd like someone who knew better than to interrupt a storm as it passed. Blair tried to salvage the night. She picked up a glass and made a toast, thanking everyone for coming, calling the day beautiful through a tremble she couldn't hide. Her voice cracked on the word future. She glanced toward Liam for support, but he was already walking away, jaw clenched, disappearing through the side of the tent without a backward glance. Someone I barely knew, maybe a cousin of Blair's, leaned in and said, "Was that really necessary? On their wedding day?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just confused. I smiled. A small closed thing. "No," I said. "I didn't ruin anything. I just changed the ending." She blinked at that, didn't respond, just turned back to her table, twisting the stem of her wine glass between her fingers. By nightfall, the newlyweds had left early, claiming a headache, though no one believed it. Their chairs sat empty, napkins folded exactly where they'd left them. The catering crew moved slowly around the edges, packing away trays no one touched. The flower arrangements, oddly enough, looked prettier without so many people around. Softer. Real. I sat a little longer, watching petals curl gently at the edges, and thought about the gate key I'd had recut just that morning. I gave them 5 days. Not out of obligation, not out of kindness. Just memory. I remembered what it felt like to be young and untethered, caught between what you wanted and what you thought you deserved. I remembered that brittle kind of hope. So I waited 5 days. They didn't say goodbye. No knock on the door. No note slipped through the mailbox. Just silence. And then the sound of tires on gravel as they drove away before sunrise on the 5th day. When I opened the carriage house that afternoon, the air inside was stale with cheap takeout and perfume. Half-packed boxes littered the living room floor, a few still open, filled with mismatched mugs and a pile of half-used candles. A curtain rod had been yanked loose from the wall, left dangling at an angle, screws still clinging to one end. I walked slowly through each room. Not angry, just deliberate. I swept up crumbs folded in abandoned towel, opened the windows to let the past air out. The fridge was still running. Inside, nothing but an expired bottle of almond milk and a slice of cake in a plastic box. I closed the door and saw it taped to the front with floral washi tape. A list. Written in Blair's narrow, angled hand. Main house walkthrough title transfer. Locksmith registry, update. Nameplate, order. She had it all laid out like a wedding itinerary, as if I were a formality she'd already processed. I stood there for a long moment, reading each line twice. Then I reached up, tore the page cleanly down the middle, and dropped both halves into the trash can beneath the sink. The carriage house felt larger with them gone. Still worn, still small, but more mine again. I locked the door on the way out and slid the new key into my coat pocket. As I crossed the lawn, back toward the main house, I saw Dana's car waiting in the driveway. 3 weeks slipped by in a kind of quiet I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Morning coffee on the porch. Evenings spent trimming back the hedges. I kept myself moving not out of distraction, but out of instinct. Work steadies the mind. The land at least had never lied to me. Then the letter arrived. A plain envelope, no return address, the kind you buy in a rush at the post office counter. But the handwriting Liam's was unmistakable. He always pressed too hard with his pen, the ink sinking slightly into the page. A holdover from childhood when he wanted every word to be believed. I opened it at the kitchen table. He didn't waste time with greetings. I didn't know she'd go that far, the first line read, as if distance from the act absolved him, as if standing behind her during that slap didn't say enough. He went on, I need time. Things got out of control. I felt cornered. Not a single moment where he named what he'd done. Not one admission that he let someone else speak for him, act for him, hit for him. There was no apology tucked between the lines. No mention of the house, the trust, the plans they'd laid behind my back. Just page after page of explanations dressed up as honesty, as if explanations could soften the crack that had split open between us. I read it twice, then folded it along the crease it came with. I didn't reach for a pen, didn't start another letter in return. I'd spent too many years cushioning him from the world, smoothing out his choices, giving him the benefit of the doubt. What good had that done either of us? Instead, I walked to my study, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and placed the letter beside the trust papers. A file not of memories, but of reminders. Evidence of a line I could not uncross for him. I closed the drawer gently, almost carefully, and turned toward the window. Outside, Clara's car was pulling into the drive. Clara came by that Sunday like she used to before everything got loud. She didn't text ahead or knock like a guest. She just let herself in through the side gate and walked toward the orchard with a paper bag in one hand and a bunch of tulips in the other. We sat on the garden bench near the old apple tree, the one that still gave fruit even after that hard winter 5 years back. She handed me a pastry without saying a word. Lemon and poppy seed. My favorite, though. She never made a fuss about remembering things like that. I never liked her, she said after a few bites, brushing crumbs off her lap. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to add. Instead, we talked about things that didn't sting. The chipped paint on the porch rails. Whether I should adopt another cat now that I had no one to ask permission from. A little flower stand at the edge of the property, maybe come spring, just a table, some jars. Nothing fancy. Small ideas. Quiet ones. The kind that grow when you stop spending your energy defending what's already yours. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. This wasn't victory. It was air finally moving through a space that had been closed too long. It was a kind of stillness that didn't feel like waiting, didn't ache with anticipation. It just was. Free. Clara reached over and fixed the collar of my sweater like I was still her little sister who didn't know how to dress for the wind. We didn't talk about Liam. Not directly. But when I mentioned repainting the porch myself, she said, "Good. That's your color anyway." She stayed until the shadows stretched across the yard. We watched the trees sway, listened to the last of the birds call in from the fields. When she stood to leave, I didn't walk her out. She knew the way, always had. After she left, I stayed a little longer on the bench staring at the orchard. A light came on in the guest house. It was close to midnight when I heard the tires on gravel. Not fast, slow, hesitant, like whoever was behind the wheel hadn't decided whether to pull in or keep going. I didn't move from my chair. The teacup rested warm in my hands, steam curling lazily toward the ceiling. Outside the window, the driveway curved just enough for someone to pause without being seen fully. I heard the hum of the engine, a soft idle. Then nothing. They didn't honk, didn't step out. The car lingered for a minute, maybe two, before easing away in silence. I didn't turn on the porch light. I just sat the way you do when a storm is already past and you're not interested in the forecast anymore. In my lap, the rows of yarn grew longer, steady. I'd started the scarf weeks ago, simple stitches, nothing fancy. Something to keep my hands moving while the air settled again around me. I didn't wonder who it was. That house has a way of drawing back those who thought they'd left on their terms. But I'd learned not every knock deserves an answer. Not every pause at the gate is an invitation. The porch light stayed off. Because I didn't need to prove anything. The deed doesn't carry my name anymore. On paper, I am a tenant in a trust. But I know where every board creaks. I know where the winter light hits the kitchen sink just right. I know the weight of the land in spring, how the soil smells when it's time to plant tomatoes. My name may be absent from the title, but it's carved into the walls, into every choice that kept this place upright. They can't rewrite that. The next morning, I took my tea outside, sat on the steps as the sun cut through the orchard. A single daffodil had bloomed by the fence line. I reached for my gloves, feeling the warmth of the yarn still clinging to my fingers. There was soil to turn, and for the first time in a long while, no one standing in my way.